The torment of the siege of Zamboanga City is etched deeply in the hound-down family home, but they have left the scars. They see many memories built for decades, but now reduced to ashes. Their home was one of the many destroyed during the 19-day siege between Philippine soldiers and fighters from the Moro National Liberation Front in September.
The siege started when MILF fighters marched on Zamboanga City demanding to hoist the flag at the center of the city. Thousands of government soldiers responded in the days followed the crisis. The crisis left at least 2,000 people dead.
Today, let's go back to what happened to Zamboanga during 2013 and why is it still considered as a recent calamity. I, Judy Jules Pincheji Kagulada,
And I am Mark Esperat, and we will be talking about what happened during the siege by Rins Jan, planning for when issues like this happens again by Jamira, and Robbie will talk about what is the reason for the siege and some short stories of the siege by Fatima and how the government reacted to the siege by Chris K. Sagoso.
On the 9th day of September in the year 2013, fire had obliterated homes. Schools, airlines, and businesses were all forced to close their doors. The reason behind was that Zamboanga had been under the siege between military forces and rebel troops known as MNLF or Moro National Liberation Front. During the course of the combat between these two opposing groups, Zamboanga's situation was declared as humanitarian crisis by United Nations. The numbers were startling and revealing. According to government estimates and based on the number given by the UN, over 190 people died and more than 200 were injured. Over 109,000 people were affected in Zamboanga province with another 19,000 displaced in Basilan province. Both in the southern Philippines and over 10,000 homes were damaged. In the span of the 20 days fight, there were hostages including children who were used by the rebels as their human shields, some of whom have been killed and wounded during military operations. We could not imagine the trauma that those hostages had experienced, and psychological treatment must be done to them. After the 20-day combat had subsided, at least 30 Moro National Liberation Front rebels had surrendered. They were asked by the government about the reason as to why they attacked the city, and they explained that they wanted to raise awareness of the government's move of entering into a peace deal with another rebel group, the Moro Islamic Liberation Front or MILF, fearing that the agreement they signed in 1996 would be sidelined. It had been 8 years ago, but the remnants and the memories of the Zamboangueños about the siege still remains. Back to studio.
Terrorist attacks at the Zamboanga siege have caused many people to be apprehensive about the prospect of another future terrorist attacks in the city. Here are the things you can do before any possible terrorist attacks occurs. Finding out what can happen is the first step. Once you have determined the events possible and their potential effect in your community, it is important that you discuss them with your family or any household member. Develop a disaster plan together. Create an emergency communication plan. Then after creating, you have to establish a meeting place where you will meet with your family members. Before doing that, you have to assemble an emergency kit. If you have members of the family who are still in school, check their school emergency plan. If an event of terrorism took place, remember to remain calm and be patient at all times. Follow the advice of your local emergency officials. Listen to your radio or television for news and instructions. If the event occurs near you, check for any possible injuries. Give first aid and get help for seriously injured people around you. And if the event occurs near your home while you are there, check for damage using a flashlight. Do not light matches or candles or turn on electrical switches. Check for fires, fire hazards, and other household hazards. Sniff for gas leaks. If you smell gas or suspect that there's a leak, turn off the main gas valve and open the windows, and get everyone outside quickly. Shut off any damaged utilities. Confine and secure your pets. Call your family contact. Do not use the telephone again unless it is a life-threatening emergency. Don't forget to check on your neighbors, especially those who are elderly or disabled. What to expect after an act of terrorism? An act of terrorism may have widespread and devastating results. You should be prepared for the following things after an attack. There can be significant number of casualties and damages to buildings and infrastructures. Heavy law enforcement involvement at the local levels follows a terrorist attack due to the event's criminal nature. Health and mental health resources in the affected communities can be strained to their limits, maybe even overwhelmed. Extensive media coverage, strong public fear, and international implications and consequences can continue for a prolonged period. Workplaces and schools may be closed, and there may be restrictions on domestic and international travel. You and your family or household may have to evacuate in area avoiding roads blocked for your safety. We are not being pessimistic. Taking caution and doing preventive measures about issues that might or might not happen only shows that being ready in time of despair can actually take a sideways turn on the worst possible case scenarios out there. This can take place when we are consumed by our own ignorance and turmoil of not knowing what to do in times like this.
This all has similarities from the situation 12 years ago. Back then, Nur Miswari had announced that he was taking up arms against the government again after he was ousted as the MNLF chairman and it split into two rival factions. The insurgents, numbering around 180, are believed to be led by Javier Malik, a veteran MNLF commander who has been involved in many other armed attacks in the past. He is known to be a loyal supporter of Nur Miswari, but according to the government, the MNLF leader has denied authorizing this latest operation. For their part, the MNLF gunmen in Zamboanga City have said that they are fighting for an independent state, not the autonomy the government is negotiating with the larger MILF insurgent group. And second we have is the sense of entitlement. At the heart of this particular fight, among several armed conflicts in the southern Philippines, is Nur Miswari's sense of entitlement, as the government describes it, and his steady marginalization from the wider peace process. The MILF refused to negotiate with the government, so then President Fidel Ramos turned to Nur Miswari to negotiate the landmark 1996 agreement, creating the autonomous region in Muslim Mindanao, or what we call now ARM, which was intended to be a precursor to a more permanent autonomy deal. But 5 years later, the deal had soared, with Nur Miswari facing widespread criticism over poor leadership and corruption. His supporters blamed the government for failing to give sufficient assistance and funding to run the impoverished and war-damaged ARM. And third we have is the territorial fighting. Last year, the MILF and the government announced a breakthrough in the talks and signed a ceasefire. In recent months, they have made progress in sharing their revenues and negotiating power. Government officials have made it clear in their comments that they no longer regard Nur Miswari as a negotiating partner. The MILF is a larger group and has been tougher opponent in recent years. The hope is clearly that if the peace deal holds, most of the MNLF factions will want to jump on board to make sure that they get their share of the benefits. Nur Miswari has responded with growing indignation, accusing the government of betraying the agreement it signed back in 1996. But even when he dramatically declared an independent Bangsamoro state last month, he promised he would pursue it through peaceful means. The government will now have to decide whether Nur Miswari actually authorized the attack on Zamboanga City and what they do with him. That's it, and again, I am your reporter for today, Robert Blanca, signing off.
I'm Fatima Anisa Asaldani, and I'm going to tell the stories about the Zamboanga Siege. The Zamboanga Siege happened in the city of Zamboanga in 2013. This event was characterized as urban encounter by the Philippine forces and the MNLF troops. The siege was reportedly ignited as a result of failure and the implementation of the 1976 Tripoli Agreement between the government and MNLF. This event has also caused fear and distress among the residents of Zamboanga. Many people were displaced from their homes as chaos risen. The Philippine soldiers were ordered by the government to continue the fight against the MNLF troops. These soldiers sacrificed a lot to defend the people of Zamboanga and likewise to protect the city from the total war destruction. During the conflict, there were several victims, and bloodshed became inevitable. Many lost hopes and became homeless as the siege escalated not only in the city center but also near the city's seaports. The siege was bloody where there were several deaths from the MNLF compared to the Philippine troops and also left many casualties. The Zamboanga siege has indeed caused trauma and animosity among the populace of city. The siege has similarly caused great social, political, cultural, and economic impact to the lives of many Zamboangueños. Nevertheless, despite of the traumatic nature of the event, the people of Zamboanga became more stronger and resilient as they survived the nightmare of the conflict when it finally ended after almost a month of its existence. Thank you, and that's all.
President Benigno Aquino has issued a virtual ultimatum to the remnants of the armed followers of the Mora National Liberation Front, leader Nermis Wari, to surrender or face the government's full military might.
The rebels staged a pre-dawn attack on Zamboanga City on September 9. On the 12th day of fighting between MNLF forces and the combined military and police forces, Aquino ordered government troops to prepare for a protracted battle against the hardcore rebel forces who have absconded in some villages. Aquino told his military commander to execute a well-thought-out operation against the holdout rebels so as not to harm the civilian hostages. Aquino, who has remained in Zamboanga City since September 13, said the government will fight violence with violence. Aquino said he remained in the war zone because, as Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces and the Police, it was his responsibility to see to it that all government agencies would handle the crisis properly. During the siege, Zamboanga City, which is famous for its unique blend of Christian and Muslim culture, has become a ghost city. The government is preparing the filing of rebellion charges against the MNLF rebels involved in the attack led by a certain Javier Malik, who is said to be a trusted Miswari commander. According to military authorities, the 12 days of fighting resulted in 113 deaths, 172 wounded, 111 rebels either captured or have surrendered, while 172 civilian hostages rescued by government forces. The Department of Social Welfare and Development said the number of evacuees has risen to about 110,000, or roughly about 10% of the city's population of nearly 1 million. They are now sheltered in several evacuation centers in the city. The estimated total damage in properties, both public and private, as a result of the siege could reach to millions of US dollars. In order to slow down the advance of government troops, the rebels have torched some 500 houses. The government has not yet decided on whether or not to include Miswari in the rebellion charges.
It's sad to hear what happened to Zamboangueños during the Zamboanga siege.
Indeed, partner, even until now, some of our fellow men still have traumas of what happened during Zamboanga siege.
Right now, let's hear from the victims and their experience during the siege.
Abigail and Elvie, come in.
From the hidden horrors that were brought by the siege, one of the victims has agreed to share his first-hand experience in the situation. Mr. Mendoza, are you there?
Yes.
I hope you're doing fine. Okay, according to your data, you are a former student of Putik Central School. How were your experiences before the siege? Where were you? And how did your family find out about the current situation?
Even before the start of the siege, we were blessed that our family decided to change houses 1 week prior to the occurrence of the siege. So panic and disorder didn't occur in our minds since we were approximately 20 kilometers away from the battleground then. Yet it was surprising when I first heard of the situation from our relatives still in town. And as a naive kid, I never thought it was possible. Yet when we checked the TV and radio, it was already happening in full force.
Can you tell me about your experiences during the siege and how it affected your studies?
In the first few days of the siege, since no one was advised to go out, we just stayed coped at home and listening to the situation in town on what may happen, while school and my study became the lowest of my priorities during those times, since we were more concerned in our health and safety.
What life did you live during the pandemic?
It was horrible. The life back then was like a routine. Time just passed by quickly with nothing new left to do. But I still managed to go through those tough times since I know that there are people dying out there just to protect that space of peace at our home. And I'm not really the victim of the siege, just a witness who experienced 1/10 of their hardships.
As a student, how did you cope up with the said situation after the siege?
It wasn't really a big issue for our school since they just assumed we had taken a long semester break and school resumed then thereafter.
Thank you for sharing your experiences. Now, let us proceed to another witness. Partner?
Yes, partner. Now we will know another point of view from Miss Medrosa Malayansong. Ma'am, are you there?
Yes.
What was your state before the siege, and when and where were you that time?
I was at home doing household chores. Life was okay and peaceful, hence the society felt secured.
So, how did your family manage to deal with the situation?
It was hard actually, but we kept calm and followed safety measures by watching the news from authorities. We even transferred from house to house just to be safe.
Did your work get suspended during the siege, and what was your daily experience?
Yes, all work had been suspended. It was tremendous. Every day was suffocating, scary, disturbing, and unsafe. Especially the affected areas were much burnt down.
Does the responses of your city sufficient this time? Can you state your own experience?
They were sufficient for keeping the news updated to people, but food supply and rescue was insufficient, and it was hard for us people to survive enough at the siege.
Thank you for sharing and allowing us to hear your experience. Truly, the siege has imprinted us rough memories, but these memories, our experience will make us stronger. Thank you, and back to you.
All of us was unprepared when the crisis happened.
Imagine if you are a survivor and you did not even know where to start to pack and what to do.
Now let's hear from Sharadine, Noraline, and Cecilia on what to do if something like this will happen again. I hope not.
Being ready all the time is better than regrets will be filled at the end of the day.
We should be prepared in any kinds of phenomenon.
That's right, dear. We don't know what the future holds, so let's be at least ready for what challenges will come in our lives.
Oh, I guess we ran out of time. That's it for today. This is Crimson's Castaway, leaving you a message. Life is short, take life seriously, and smile. This is Judy Jose Vinci Cagulada.
And I am Mark Adriel Espera. Thank you for listening.